What's going on, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream interview with Niko House and Michael Tracey. Mike, what's going on, man? What's I see you've been involved in a lot of drama.
What's
on
up,
Twitter?
Niko?
I've never seen you involved in drama like this. Usually you keep your head on the straight and narrow, you stay to yourself, you never complain about anything. And some would call you a contrarian at times. I would never say anything like that though, but some people have said that.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's funny. My personal life is like entirely drama free. So the only time I ever experience drama is on the internet.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
And yeah, I'll admit that at times I've probably instigated some drama, but it's not just for the sake of drama. It's usually because there's some like principle at stake. But whatever.
You know, it's funny. Somebody actually tagged me on Facebook. I took a picture with some supporters at the California Democratic Convention, and she literally tagged the photo, my favorite drama king. I was like, hey, okay. I mean, I get that. Whatever. I'll take it.
there are YouTubers who do seem to live for drama. Let's be honest. I don't know about you.
There is a whole section of YouTube that like outside of politics where literally they comment on drama between other YouTubers.
Yeah,
I did not know this was a thing, and I thought only the Progressive Voice did that. I know you like the TMZ of politics and all that good stuff, but she's like, one of my friends like, no, there's actually like they comment on drama between other. There was a whole boxing match set up apparently.
I remember that. I was like, was that Logan Paul or
Logan Paul and that other kid from Great Britain? Like, yo, this is real life. Like, and there was
drama always gets clicks and views, so it's always going to be like a fertile ground to get people get the attention of your viewership.
Absolutely, but you know, I feel a little bit better about the drama that we start because there's usually a point to it. There's an underlying point, and I think and one of the points that you were trying to make was regarding the Steven Crowder's Carlos Maza incident, where basically Steven Crowder got demonetized. And so I would like to know what is your thought like as far as the demonetization of it? And I want to say this really quick before you do that. I don't like Steven Crowder. He's an idiot. But my issue is like the inconsistency with their decision making. And it shows that, in my opinion, they don't really have the competence to be making these decisions. And it also shows that if they're willing, if their threat is, we're going to demonetize the shit out of you based and then not be consistent, that, in my opinion, means like, oh, you recognize that this is a public utility that people need to live their lives. You know, if they've made this their business model. And at that point, should we not be regulating this in some way and making the bar for demonetization or deplatforming so high that basically the government and the entity would have to go to court in order to get it taken care of, and it would be so costly that they better make sure they're getting it right so that principle can be applied regularly going forward. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Did you tweet out the link, by the way?
I did. I tagged you in it.
Okay. Let me just retweet that so don't have split attention span here before I address your question.
No problem.
All right, gotcha. There we go. All right. The tweet is done. All right. So I guess this drama, quote unquote, stemmed from a clip that was taken from one of my videos that I did on this Crowder incident and Carlos Maza stuff. And number one, I'm honored that people are even clipping out my YouTube videos because
it was a really random part.
Being a YouTuber is not really central to my online identity. Even like to call myself a YouTuber is a little weird. At the Young Turks, obviously, I did a lot of YouTube, but prior to that, it wasn't really my main thing at all. I've started out as a not traditional journalist, but journalism. I did journalism by like writing articles and tweeting and stuff, like how most journalists do that, and I kind of ended up entering into YouTube from there. So it's a little different from how most YouTubers become involved in the public sphere. They usually go directly to YouTube. And
I was an activist first before I got into video journalism. So I completely understand.
Yeah. But the clip that was circulated, and by the way, it was circulated by this guy who I don't even want to say his name because he's that despicable. He works for Gizmodo. The guy's been trolling me for years. Usually I ignore it. but he actually did just a classically defamatory tweet of against me around a week or so ago, and that was other drama amongst a different crowd. So not like YouTuber drama; it was more like New York City media drama, which I also tend to be enmeshed in. But basically, he just lied about my employment history and made up facts. I was like, all right,
man, I had Huffington posted the same thing about me, so I completely understand.
Well, I mean, this is like there's a high bar for what constitutes defamation in U.S. law, as opposed to like British law where the bar is lower. And this, is as straightforward as defamation as you can get. Therefore, I would have cause to bring legal action against this individual. But whether it's worth the
energy and the effort,
and the additional drama that would create is probably dissuading me from doing that. But I probably could. But that guy, continued his trolling crusade and clipped out a part of the video where I essentially said, "Get over it," in reaction to the Carlos Maza's complaints about Crowder. And when I said "get over it," I'm not saying that all LGBT people should get over it when they are maligned or derided using the kind of buffoonish terminology and demeaning, attacks that somebody like Crowder uses. And I agree that Crowder is like a dope. I mean, he's not, number one, he's not funny.
He's really not. He's really not.
He's supposedly like a political comedian. So you'd think that his number one priority would be to be funny. So him not being funny is like the most discrediting thing you can say about him. But on top of that, he's also like politically gross.
And he's really sensitive, actually. He pretends to be like this quote unquote alpha male. Like he always complains about betas. And I don't know if you ever saw that debate where he went up against a little kid and the little kid like obliterated him. And so he tries to like backhandedly insult the little kid, and the kid like basically was coming back at him, and he's like, "Oh, now we're going to insult. I'm going to take the mic away from you. We're trying to have a civil discussion." And I'm like, "Oh, here we go, civility."
He does this really tedious shtick where he goes around and challenges like college students to change his mind.
Yeah, I know. And that was the setting that it was in.
Because the only people that he can debate are like 19-year-olds with emotional problems. And he can kind of twist their words and make them look foolish. And sometimes, to be fair, they do make themselves look foolish. But
I mean, they're 19 years old. They have no great grasp of like how what they're learning can be applied to society yet, because they haven't lived yet. They have no experience.
You're not. Well, I mean, I'm sure that there are competent 19-year-olds who could debate him, but that approach is so emblematic of how a lot of right-wing online media approaches popular political issues. Ben Shapiro does the same thing, where he kind of has fostered this unearned reputation as a master debater.
I don't get it.
Where it seems like the people who he's debating, quote unquote, most of the time are people who show up to his, speeches that he gets paid probably like $50,000 to do on college campuses, and take the mic and ask him questions. And obviously the dynamic is such at those events where he's going to automatically have the upper hand, and he can, basically own or, destroy the people who are challenging him, because they're 19-year-olds who don't have any experience engaging in public in that kind of way. So if you want to portray yourself as this awesome debater, you have to at least accept challenges from people who are competent adults who actually have some experience debating in that kind of format. And Ben Shapiro doesn't really do that, as far as I know.
Same thing with Dave Rubin, right? Dave Rubin is very similar. Mr. Marketplace of ideas. And
I've challenged Ben Shapiro to debate. I'll say, hey, let's debate U.S. foreign policy in Israel. And
won't do it.
And he's never gotten back.
But he wants to come at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez online all the time. Why don't you debate me? Because she's a congresswoman. Why would she waste her time debating you? First of all,
it was a marketing shtick, and it worked because it increased Ben Shapiro's profile and like social media engagement and YouTube views, and that gets him where he wants to be in terms of having the exposure to make a marketable program for himself, and then he just increases in stature. So it was just a shtick. Yeah. He knew that AOC was not going to actually debate him.
And then when people actually challenge him to debates, he's nowhere to be found.
But anyway, which is all just to say, I've said over and over again that I find Steven Crowder to be like an appalling doofus. Okay. However, if you are in Carlos Maza's position, right, and you are employed by a major media organization, Vox, and that employer pays you to make provocative political statements online as part of your job, which is what Carlos Maza does. I mean, I just reviewed a small handful of them, and Carlos Maza accuses people of being white supremacists. He says that free speech is an outdated concept and should be essentially abolished on the internet. He said he's advocated that street political violence be undertaken against his enemies. So those are all positions that if you want to argue for them or against them, okay, fine. I'm not even stating now whether or not I agree with those positions. I'm just saying that you have to know that they are incredibly provocative. And if that's the line of work you've chosen as an adult, then you can't act shocked and beleaguered when people who you're accusing of these incendiary, you're making these incendiary allegations against, respond in kind. And not he says that he has a thick skin. Okay, I get attacked all day, every day, right? But it's never occurred to me to complain to Twitter or YouTube or Facebook or whoever to punish my enemies or the people who are attacking me on the basis of their insults being excessively mean. No, I'll attack them back. I'll engage in a heated exchange of ideas with them, but I'm not going to tattletale to the tech authorities as if there's some kind of like stand-in parental force to impose discipline on the people who are making fun of me, because I, as an adult, have chosen to be in the public sphere to some degree, and that necessarily entails receiving pushback and insults that can at times be extremely demeaning. Yeah, I know that Carlos Maza is gay, right? And some of Crowder's attacks on him were gay, but I'm sorry, Carlos Maza makes his gayness central to his online political identity. His Twitter handle is gay wonk. He talks about his sexual proclivities online, which I don't know why anybody cares about, but he does that often. So therefore, you got to just expect that people are going to make fun of that, right? That's because he's not an ordinary person on the street who's getting made fun of and attacked. He's somebody who has been chosen as a profession to put out incendiary political statements online. And therefore, if you use those insults against you as grounds to demand censorship or demand that YouTube modify its speech regulation policies to appease you, which is what Carlos Maza has done, and he's succeeded at doing it, then yeah, I tell you to get over it. I'm not saying to everybody who's LGBT needs to get over it if they're demeaned in such a fashion. I'm saying Carlos Maza specifically has to get over it in the sense that he shouldn't use that as a ground to demand that the tech companies, or YouTube in particular in this case, change their policies on his behalf and effectively impose greater and more stringent censorship regulations.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate, and for everybody who's curious, I did invite both Michael and Michael on, Mike and Mike. Now Mike Figueredo said that he didn't want to do it at this time, so I don't want people to think that we're like purposely cutting him out of the conversation. But I'm going to play devil's advocate since he is not here to advocate for himself. So from Mike's perspective, now I will, admit that your comments were taken a little out of context, like, to be fair to you. Now there is still the fact that remains that even if, for example, if I made my entire shtick about like me being black, like if that was my thing, that does not then give Steven Crowder the right to go on to in a YouTube show with hundreds, millions of people that watch him and say the only reason that YouTube is catering to him is because he's black. This black banana eating, blah, 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 this cotton picking, da, 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 da. Like, that does not give him the right to do that. And now, granted, I agree with you. I probably wouldn't say go get him taken off YouTube. I wouldn't necessarily care about that aspect of it. I would probably punch back as well. But when you say something like that to somebody who has like these experiences that you haven't really experienced, where people have told them to get over it. Well, I don't know if what Maza was saying is true about being maligned and attacked by followers and by Crowder supporters, probably, but we all get attacked in some way. So I'm not sure if I care that much about that. But from Mike's perspective, from a totally different like outlook, he feels that it's like somebody else telling him that those experiences aren't legitimate just because, Maza does embody or embolden his whole like gay thing that he's trying to use to market himself. Like, I don't think that the marketability, like him using that his gayness or his sexuality necessarily means that it's okay for Crowder to attack him for it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that he should get over that aspect of it. Like, I would say you should get over the attacks because it doesn't matter. But I think because of what you said right before you said get over it is why Mike reacted the way he did. Is that fair to say?
I mean, I don't want to speak for why he reacted one way or another. I had no idea what his sexual orientation was prior to his, attacking me and my replying, and nor do I frankly care what his sexual orientation is. I mean, why would I care about that? I'm engaging on a specific subject, and you just outlined the exact argument that I've been trying to explicate, which is that even if Steven Crowder attacked you in the most heinous, derogatory terms, you therefore would not go to YouTube and say you need to punish this person and impose censorship on my behalf because the insults were excessively mean. Now, that doesn't say that you're giving him a pass for those demeaning insults. You can go right back at him and call him out for the idiocy that the idiot that he is and how politically abhorrent he is. I encourage anybody to do that if they're attacked and if they feel that it's justified to respond and point out the immorality of the person who's attacking them. But it's a different issue to use that as a basis from which to demand censorship or to demand speech regulation protocols be implemented in order to placate you, especially if you're a professional journalist, which Maza is. So yeah. I don't, if somebody thinks that I'm denying their experiences because I said get over it to one specific individual, no, I'm telling you right now, I'm not denying your experience. I'm simply saying that the experiences, quote unquote, of this particular adult professional journalist should not be used as a grounds to totally upend the way that YouTube allows content to transmit its servers. And I think there's a crucial distinction there. And if you don't understand it, or you're unwilling to, comprehend the difference, I don't know what to tell you, because I think I'm trying to be as clear as I can possibly be on that front.
No, I get what you're saying. You're basically saying he played possum. And then use that to try and implement censorship on somebody he considers a political enemy.
And it was censorship.
And it had a huge effect on other YouTubers, by the way, in case people don't know.
Yeah, so Crowder was just demonetized. So he wasn't actually purged from YouTube, although others were.
Man, but demonetized when you're making that much money? Whoo,
right.
I'm sure he has employees and shit. So,
but Maza demanded that he be purged from YouTube. So he was demanding outright censorship, okay? And YouTube didn't cater to that extent, but they did cave to a degree by demonetizing him, which has, as you know, a huge impact on the livelihoods of people who are affected when that takes place. And it was done purely as a capitulation to a pressure campaign waged by Maza and other people in the elite media who ended up joining his side and demanding that YouTube do something. I mean, the reason why I think it's so infantile for Maza to have gone about it this way is because if you actually read his tweets, he calls what he's saying a, quote, cry for help, as if he's a kid on a playground and needs teacher to come and reprimand the bully. And then he's also saying that he needs, quote, protection from YouTube. So he needs the tech oligarchs to protect him from his political adversaries who are being excessively mean to him online. I'm sorry.
I've never asked that, and I've had some some stuff said about me.
I'm sure you have.
I've never really advocated for anybody to be silenced on YouTube. I don't believe in silencing people. I feel like it's our job.
Yeah. If you believe you need to be protected by, Silicon Valley oligarchs and you're a professional adult journalist, you probably should consider a different line of work.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Once you get into the public, I mean, for Christ's sakes, LeBron had the N-word sprayed across his house and he lives in Hollywood Hills in LA. I mean, it's going to happen. And I agree from that perspective. He should have thick skin. I do also agree with you 100%. You should not be using your personal grievances to advocate and the power that he wields from being part of Vox. Like, he knew what he was doing when he said that. He was, and I do believe that he knew that there would be reverberating effects, right? Because when Crowder got demonetized, that wasn't the only thing that happened. Once again, that people don't realize, there were almost 2,000 channels that were deleted right after that.
Crowder got the least of it. Including a channel by Ford Fisher, who basically just documents all kinds of street protests and, politically extreme behavior and just puts it out as just the documentary record. His stuff was purged because I guess he had some videos where
neo-Nazis, right?
Yeah, or whatever. And it's just like he's not advocating neo-Nazi principles by displaying neo-Nazis engaged in debates or whatever. But those are the people who get swept up in the collateral damage when journalists and others demand more stringent regulation of speech, which is always going to be implemented imperfectly, and it's going to victimize people who essentially did nothing wrong. So that was the effect, practically speaking, of these demands for censorship, notwithstanding.
And Stephen Crowder's going to be right back to getting remonetized. You know, Maz's going to keep his job. He's still going to be attacked regardless because he's a neoliberal, and those channels are still going to be deleted.
Yeah. And where are we going here? Because the overwhelming direction that's being furthered by these calls for censorship, and it's amazing to me that that journalists are the ones leading the charge for the call for censorship. I thought historically that journalists were supposed to be the staunchest opponents of censorship because free speech is totally integral to the entire notion of journalism. But it's kind of become inverted where they're the most aggressive proponents of censorship. So they're the ones creating a set of incentives on these tech companies to more stringently regulate the speech that transmits to their platforms. And where are we going where these companies now are going to have increasing amounts of unilateral power to dictate whether you or I can put out videos or tweets or whatever it may be, because it might violate some vague standard of extremism or hate speech or whatever. It's a bad situation. When YouTube announced this change, they put out actually 2 blog posts on the same day. I think it was Wednesday. One of them seemed like it was like a policy change that had been in the works for a while. Maybe it was accelerated by the Crowder episode. But they said that they were going to be more assertive in purging any extremist content or hate speech from YouTube, which includes like supremacism. Notably, they didn't use the word white supremacy. They used the word just supremacism. So theoretically, that could apply to Black, Hispanic, any kind of supremacist conduct. So let's see who else gets penalized by that new restriction. But obviously people cheered it because they think it applies exclusively to white supremacists. No, according to YouTube's stated rationale, that's not the case. But they said that, okay, so we're going to be more assertively collaborating with lawmakers, they said, as if that should give us all peace of mind that elected officials anywhere in the world, presumably, can basically command YouTube to expurgate a certain political actor because they could be accused of extremism, right? And also they're going to be more amplifying authoritative voices, which of course means corporate media, established channels, and makes it that much more difficult for lesser known people to actually gain a foothold on YouTube.
And it's interesting you brought that up because it's something I talk about often. I say it's not just that it seems like the way they want to apply their new rules or the community guidelines are very sporadic and very like inconsistent. But on top of that, you know, they talk about lying and bullying even or extremism in one form or another. And we've seen CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News engage in all of these things, never being penalized. In fact, it seems like they're being, as everyone else is being penalized, the only ones that are being uplifted at this point are the mainstream channels. And I would say that, and this is something that I've been trying to figure out what's going on in my analytics lately. I talked to Kim Iverson about it and a couple of others. It used to be 70% of your videos or video views came from suggested views. The problem is, out of nowhere, within the last week, they've shifted. Well, 2 weeks really. They've shifted. Now, 60% of my video views only comes from my subscribers, and then others come from shares. But most of my recommended viewership is only like 15%, which means they made some crazy change in the algorithm to make sure that you could not reach massive amounts of new viewers, which is like problematic as hell. So it's not even just like a singular issue with YouTube. It's almost like there's this culmination of an attempt to censor free speech or any type of agitation, or rhetorical agitation. And people like Maza never are on the back end of that, attack or the front end of that attack. But people like myself, your channel, Kim Iverson, Tim Black, and others, we're on the back end where we're not even involved in any of the shit. And we always end up getting hurt by it. So
yeah, I mean, my channel's not big enough to where I could actually detect a quantifiable decrease in anything. Really, I haven't even really looked at it. Frankly, it's because again, YouTube is just kind of ancillary to what I tend to do. I do basically a video a day, and I put my podcast on YouTube. It's not as central to my overall output as maybe others who would be more affected. But you point out something that needs to be emphasized. The standards are totally arbitrary. In the second post that YouTube put out on that day, specifically addressing the Crowder situation, they admitted that in their initial review of Crowder, he didn't violate any guidelines. And they only determined that he needed to be penalized because they said they had to take into account the harm, quote unquote, brought upon the wider YouTube community. First of all, what the hell does that mean? What is harm? What is the YouTube community? Like, am I in the YouTube community because I post videos? I mean, that's such a bizarre doublespeak term. And when there's when the tech giants are empowered to make these arbitrary decisions, they're always going to be making decisions on behalf of people who wield power. And it's sort of a perverse dynamic because Mazza portrays himself as marginalized, even though he's employed by a major media companies, and he successfully got the leading internet video service to cater to his demands. I'm sorry, you're not marginalized if you're able to accomplish that, notwithstanding whether you might be gay or Hispanic.
Yeah,
it's just not the
case.
You
might be marginalized somewhat socially, but as far as you as a being, yeah, I don't give a damn where you at. Once you hit that type of level where you tweet at YouTube and they instantly respond, yeah, that's a whole different bracket. You in a different field than we playing in, homie. So now I want for you to address this idea that you are quote unquote right-wing hack. Now, for clarification for anybody who may be curious, many of y'all might know Michael, and you probably don't even realize you know Michael. Michael and Jank used to go at it a little bit over Russiagate. Yeah. Jank was wrong, Michael was right. We'll just go ahead and leave it at that. Jank was hella wrong, Michael was hella right. And because of that consistency of challenging the neoliberal narrative of whatever, and he challenges the right often, by the way. But obviously, like myself, a lot of the challenges that to the left make you a little bit more famous because you are pushing back against some pretty heavy hitters, and then you end up being right, and then are eventually able to right-wing hack because of that. So why do you think they go straight to that label?
Well, I mean, for one thing, I kind of balk at this demand that I self-categorize myself with an oversimplified ideological label. I think a lot of people do that just as a substitute for original thinking and reasoning. So if I say I'm a progressive, therefore everybody who's a progressive, quote unquote, is supposed to cheer me and assume that I'm right about whatever I comment on if we ostensibly share this ideological label in common. And I've just never been about that. I mean, I'm always transparent about who I vote for. I'm transparent about the places that I work for. I've worked for, the Young Turks. I worked at the Nation magazine. That was my first job in journalism, which is the flagship American left-wing magazine. But I've also written for right-wing publication. I mean, I've written for, I wrote for years for the American Conservative magazine, which is like a paleo conservative magazine. And I even wrote something this year for the Federalist because they asked me to write like what is the case for Bernie Sanders as being the front runner, and that's what I do. I mean, I don't determine what issues I'll comment on or what publications I will write for or appear on the basis of this.
It doesn't seem like your message changes either.
No, I don't think so. Like, so I go on Fox News, but I say the exact thing that I would say on a left-wing podcast, which I have done. And that's my criteria for whether I'll appear on these venues. Am I uninhibited in what I can say? And on Fox News, I've never been inhibited in the slightest. I could go on there and say that there are little green men descending on Earth if I wanted to.
Yeah, Dan there said something close to that, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are. I mean, people have been asking because I put out a tweet a couple of weeks ago. Like, I have some theories as to why there's this bizarre uptick in stories about UFOs recently. I want to be a little careful about actually putting that theory out there because I don't want to come across as like an absurd kook. So I want to give that a little more thought before I actually make it public. Although I tweet and do YouTube, it doesn't mean I have to necessarily publicize every thought that I have immediately.
In fact, you'll probably learn the more you do YouTube. Do not publicize every thought you have. That's the first thing you learn.
Yeah, I mean, I did YouTube all throughout the Young Turks tenure. I even did YouTube a little bit prior to that, where I just did interviews with people. So I've done it for a long time. And even like going back to Occupy Wall Street, I did some YouTube where I would just like film police beating people up and that kind of thing. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I think the accusation comes from my disposition, where I do tend to react negatively to instances of groupthink and illogical coalescence of opinion on the left liberal side of the spectrum, because I think there's been a ton of that under Trump, because Trump has caused this kind of cognitive distortion effect where people have lost their reasoning capacities and just kind of orient their entire worldview around like what is bad, quote unquote, for Trump on any given day. And usually what they think is bad for Trump is not even like what's bad for him in the long term. So like Russia is a perfect example of that. People put all their eggs in this basket. They convinced huge swaths of the Democratic Party base that Trump was conspiring with Russia and that Mueller was going to take him down, right? And that turned out to be a total joke. So, but that extends across the spectrum of political topics. So when I call that out, or when I criticize that, it's automatically construed as somehow me being right-wing, if incidentally some right-wingers agree with what I'm saying. And that's not true. I mean, I challenge anybody to go look at anything I've said and tell me where, on principle, it means that I must be right-wing having said so. I don't think that's the case. I think it's just a matter of emphasis.
And I want to say something too about that. It's interesting you said that, because Tulsi has been pushing back against impeachment and has also been pushing back against the Russiagate narrative. And then you see the neoliberal hacks that some of the journalists that we would call colleagues, kind of like our contemporaries, are using the same labels based off of almost the same type of justification that the neoliberals they hate use to attack Tulsi Gabbard. You know what I'm saying? And it's weird that they haven't seen that parallel yet. That like you are aware that that whole right-wing hack thing was literally invented to delegitimize dissenting voices mostly on the anti-war left.
Yeah, Tulsi actually incurs very similar criticisms, where she does attract an idiosyncratic kind of hodgepodge of supporters. Like I was just at her rallies yesterday in New York City, and it's largely left-wing people who are like vegans and anti-war and stuff, but you have a smattering of right-wingers who show up. And I'm sure you might have seen this at the events in LA or whatever. Libertarians, veterans, that kind of people who aren't left necessarily, but still are attracted to her message for whatever reason. And then those people supporting her are used to cast aspersion on her and suggest that somehow what she's saying is on principle right-wing, which it is not. And the fact that she goes on Fox is used against her. The fact that she has good relations with her colleagues who are Republicans in the House is used against her. The fact that she's willing to speak before Republican-leaning audiences is used against her. I have actually a very similar outlook as her, even though we're in different fields, where I'll talk to basically anybody, and I just refuse to accept that my having talked to a particular audience somehow reflects on me in terms of what my principles are. I only want to be judged on the basis of what I say rather than to whom I say it.
Yeah, 100% agree.
So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of fallacy there in terms of that portrayal. I understand if people just pick up snippets of what I say now and then.
But those are the things that end up going viral, right? The things that you say are like, oh my God. And it's like they rarely, if ever, go back and look at the entire video.
If you only pick up a snippet, or if you pick up one tweet every 3 weeks or something, and it's like it's challenging a conventional narrative around Trump in particular, that's taken as like Trump apologism. And especially if you've been challenging the Russian narrative throughout. I mean, Glenn Greenwald has been doing the same thing since the beginning, and he gets accused of being a Trump apologist, even though he has 1,000 other criticisms of Trump, as do I. And
every time that Trump tries to bomb Syria, tries to manufacture consent, for a false pro-war narrative, Glenn's like one of the first ones to call him out for it. But the only thing they want to call out is the fact that Glenn goes on Fox News every now and then, which is
I talk about how Trump, basically has become in hoc to the Republican donor class, which he maligned when he was running, and that's why he was perceived as a different kind of Republican. But now he's like they're totally on board with him, and he's not even pretending to be.
He is the manifestation of everything the Republican Party has become. That is literally what Trump is.
To the extent that's sort of a longer discussion, but that's roughly a reasonable distillation of what's happened. But you have that, you have the fact that he just sows petty culture war division constantly, the kind that Tulsi actually really instinctively dislikes as well, because it creates the kind of superficial divides amongst people, and that where they're fighting over petty, ultimately inconsequential issues at the expense of more structural inequities that Tulsi and Bernie would rather focus on. Mm-hmm. So I have plenty of criticism for Trump, and I state them constantly, and I've written on them, and I've talked about them. So I don't know what more people want from me. If I have a particular criticism of a line that's used against Trump that I don't think has logical or factual basis, I'm going to say so, and I don't care if you then maliciously construe that as me somehow supporting Trump. And I don't think just because I'm against the tech companies wielding this massive unchecked power to regulate the kind of speech that can flow on the internet, just because one of the quote victims of it happens to be this right-wing buffoon, doesn't mean that I am right-wing by criticizing that. So I think it's just lazy logic.
Yeah, huge. And it's crazy because I took the LSAT, and you know about the LSAT, and you literally are studying for like almost a year, right? So like logical fallacies pop up to you out of nowhere just because you're entrenched in this every day. And it's so, as a journalist and as an activist and as a political strategist as well, when you see a logical fallacy like what we saw with Russiagate, I mean, there was like, and in my opinion, when Russiagate launched, I was immediately like, this is bullshit. Nobody's gonna fall for this. That's the first thing I thought. Like, there's no way in hell and I was so fucking wrong. I was so wrong. I'm not actually, believe it or not, most of America, they released a poll, like only 38% of Americans believed in the Russiagate thing. So like, that's not good for a narrative that they're pushing nonstop. But like you said, there are certain, you gotta attack or deal with the accusation or the claim, completely separate, and especially when it comes to things like that, from the actual individual, because of the emotions that may be attached to that individual, because of the biases that may be attached to that individual, the agenda. Like whenever Trump pulled the CIA initially out of Syria, that was something to be celebrated, regardless of who did it, why he did it. It was a good thing overall. But people were like, he's pulling the CIA out of Syria to help Russia. What?
Yeah, or he was holding these summits with Kim in North Korea to somehow help Russia, or he was pulling troops, or he like declared his intention to pull troops out of Afghanistan and Syria to help Russia. So it created this cognitive distortion where every single thing that Trump did was viewed through the prism of him being compromised by Russia. I mean, Cenk does this constantly, even now, where he continues to assert that Trump is compromised by Putin, and it makes zero sense. I did a debate with him on my channel post me being at the Young Turks, because it was set up by this other podcast by Leighton Woodhouse and Zed Jelani. So they hosted it. I put it on my own, a copy of it on my own channel. People can go back and listen to that if they want. But like, Cenk is constantly making these assertions about.
Scares me when he starts going down the Russian rabbit hole. It's because it comes off. I'm not even joking, bro. So as a black man, there's certain words that that are certain instances where words are used, identities are used to demonize or to fearmonger, and it's like you become hyper conscious about it because you've heard it used towards you or somebody looks like. So when he says, "We know Trump already took money from the Russians," like that was a big ass red flag for me, because if you're replaced from the Russians, right? We know Trump took money from the Jews. Everybody would freak the fuck out, right? If Trump took money from the black people, like people would freak out. If he took money from the gays, like people would freak out the moment that any other identity was used, or any, at least what we consider as a victimized identity, was used in that instance. But because he's saying Russian, people just kind of ignore the fact that that's still xenophobic, right? That's they demonize an entire group of people that are feeling I know Russians in Miami, and they kind of like are hesitant to tell people they're Russian here because of what has happened lately.
Well, I mean, one thing that they've done is they've conflated individual Russians who are, wealthy because of the collapse of the Russian economic system in the 90s, and were profiteers and partially at the behest of the U.S., who helped facilitate that disaster, and they got a ton of money, a handful of like quote oligarchs, and those individual Russians get conflated with the Russian government. And so if an individual Russian buys a Trump condo in Miami, that gets spun by Jank and others as somehow Trump being in link with the Russians, as if every single Russian is acting at the direction of the government.
And on top of that, we never talk about the Ukrainian oligarchs who we help. We never talk about them.
Yeah, I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, every aspect of the Trump-Russia saga is so fraught with fallacies, it's almost impossible to unspool them all. Actually, and you mentioned you studied for the LSAT, so I never studied for the LSATs, but I did. If I didn't go down the journalism rabbit hole, I probably would have entered law in some form. And sometimes I like, part of me regrets not doing that. But nonetheless, I
ran away from it. So trust me, you didn't miss much.
Okay. But that's all just to say, I studied philosophy in college, right? And whenever occasionally an aspiring quote journalist will ask me like what they should do in college, how they should enter the field. Number one, the field is such a disaster. I don't even know how you enter it, frankly, because you got to take some kind of bizarre idiosyncratic route. And my experience is not going to be replicable for most people, so I don't really even have much good advice. What advice I can give is you should just don't study journalism as an academic field in college. Study philosophy. Study philosophy so you can hone your critical thinking skills.
Or politics or political science.
I studied both. I studied both, actually, political science and philosophy. It was like a double major. But philosophy is most important, I think, because it actually hones your critical faculties. And that is what's most important for journalism, especially, but it applies to all different kinds of fields. And if people were a little more rigorous in their application of logic to Trump Russia, they would have known that it was a fraud from the beginning. But the motivated reasoning and confirmation bias and all these other flaws in logical reasoning caused them to allow this narrative to steamroll to the point where now, even though Mueller emphatically dispelled the central premise of it, we're still in the midst of it, and the Democrats are going to try to impeach on the basis of it, and it's kind of insane.
Yeah, it is. And so speaking of impeachment, I saw, or you were with Tulsi yesterday at her events in New York, and I don't know which event you attended. I'm assuming it was a big one. What did you get a chance to talk with Tulsi Gabbard about?
Yeah, so she did her first campaign stop of the cycle in New York yesterday. Actually, she was in Newark, New Jersey on Friday doing a commencement speech. And then she also did that fundraiser with that caused some people on the internet to get upset. But I think they were upset wrongly about it. And we can talk about that if you want. But on Saturday, she did her first big campaign event, because it was kind of like they crafted a trip to New York around her commencement speech. So they said, okay, let's at the last second kind of try to cobble together a traditional like meet and greet or campaign style event. So she did that in Union Square, and actually in the morning. And actually the event was full to capacity, so they had to break it up into two separate events. So she did one speech and a Q&A, and then they couldn't fit everybody in, so she did another speech and a Q&A. So people were actually around the block. It was actually impressive for somebody who's still, relatively unknown as a national figure. And when she does get national exposure, it's almost always negative. So a lot of people who know her, I think, know her through social media. That at least was my impression.
Or because through the Bernie campaign, basically.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people became supporters of her campaign through social media, because a ton of people came up to me and they recognized me and like wanted selfies with me and stuff from at this event. I'm like, all right, dude, if you want a selfie with me, I guess I'll take it, but that's a little lame. I have to be honest with you. But it was good. I mean, she actually had some intelligent questions posed to her. And so she did that, and then she also did. Well, so this is amazing coincidence. And I actually asked her about this. Are you telling me this is definitely a coincidence? Because I almost don't believe it, but I guess it was. That the Hare Krishna group,
yes,
of which she's a part. So the International Hare Krishna, I forget the exact name, society or something. they have an annual like festival every year in New York City where they're headquartered in Washington Square Park. So Tulsi went. So and Tulsi like at the last minute kind of added that as a stop on her itinerary. And so I think
it was coincidence because that event.
No, it was.
Yeah. Because I was say I talked to the event coordinator so I can promo the events for him, and that was not on the stop. There was no mention of that.
I know. Yeah, it was a coincidence. It was, but still, it was kind of an amazing coincidence because it's like, wow. If I kind of thought that she would have planned a trip just to attend something like that because it's totally in her wheelhouse. But she went to that and she met with.
She is really not about the identity politics. Much.
I know.
To any degree whatsoever.
That's true. That's true. But so so I went with that and just kind of observed her at the festival. And she met with the like head guru for New York for the Hare Krishnas. And then she got up on stage and sang the Hare Krishna like song for like 15 minutes. I actually put the video on my page with her husband, Abraham. And it was really nice. It was cool. It was like everybody got really into it. You know, she's actually a decent singer.
What is she good at this point?
Yeah.
Even martial artist, politician, singer.
even I started singing the song with them because like the whole group and it's like a group song. Like everybody sings as a group. And I actually knew the words because there's a George Harrison song called "My Sweet Lord." And he was into Hare Krishna, and like part of the lyrics of that song is the Hare Krishna kind of recitation. Really? Yeah. So I knew the words anyway, but they had them up displayed for anybody who didn't know them. So that was cool. And then she actually got sort of mobbed afterwards, where they had to like hustle her out because a lot of people were a little too aggressive with her because they were like overly excited. So they hustled her out, and then after that settled down, I got to do an interview with her. I'm gonna write a column based on the interview, so I'm not gonna put it out as a podcast.
That's dope.
Yeah. But we talked a little bit about impeachment because she's obviously going very much against the grain in the Democratic Party. Every major quote unquote candidate now supports initiating impeachment proceedings, including Bernie, with the exception of Biden, who probably will come around to it at some point, although who knows. You now have, I think the last count is 60 Democrats in the House outwardly supporting impeachment, probably many more support it privately. We know that Gerald Nadler, the House Judiciary Chairman, it's been reported multiple times now that he's privately advocating impeachment, but Pelosi, is pushing back. I mean, Nadler's kind of a coward, frankly, because if he wanted to, if he felt that strongly about it, he could unilaterally initiate impeachment proceedings. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is not like a demigod. She can't prevent him from doing that. It's just because they want to maintain cohesion in the House leadership.
So we talked to even Nancy seems to know what Tulsi knows and what people, because Nancy's not an idiot. When she advocates something that seems antithetical to like the mission of the Democrats, at least nominally, she knows that she's doing it. But she also knows she wants to keep a job. She wants to remain the Speaker of the House. And she knows if she starts this impeachment process on Trump, the Republicans are going to take back over.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know anymore if that's true, frankly. And I kind of, it would confirm my priors and my confirmation bias if that were true. But on the other hand, here are some factors. And I've written pieces about this in columns. I wrote a column about it for this in the New York Daily News a week or two ago. Mm-hmm. You got to consider, so Trump supporters will always tell me when I mention this that Trump's base will be really mad, energized, and inflamed if Democrats initiate impeachment proceedings, and then that'll help Trump win re-election. Okay, yeah, they will get energized, but the Democratic base is bigger. Okay, and the Democratic base
is still bigger because they lost 20 million after 2016. They lost 20 million people.
In terms of the problem in 2016 was that elements of the Democratic base didn't turn out.
No. I'm saying like they physically lost 20 million registrations, like because of what they did to Bernie. And that was like the modest estimate of people who deregistered. And then there was the other estimation, that estimation doesn't include the people who kept their Democratic registration because they didn't want to get, because they're in closed primary states. So they lost a lot of people. So that's why I'm curious if that's included.
We'll set that aside. I think if you were just today to kind of quantify what percentage of the population comprises the Democratic base versus the Republican base, the Democratic base would be a larger percentage of the population. Now, whether they turn out, whether they're registered, whatever, is a different story. But you got to look at what happened in 2018. In 2018, the Democratic, quote, base turned out to such a great extent that they had a historic win in the House, and it had the highest turnout for any midterm election since 1914. So the electorate right now is extremely energized, especially on the Democratic side. Also on the Republican side, so we have big turnout and energy across the spectrum. And I just don't know that you can rule out the possibility. So as farcical as I believe impeachment would be, and as almost immoral as it would be, and even though it's predicated on a total fraud and fiction, I just can't let my confirmation bias cloud my judgment where I automatically rule out that it actually could pay some political dividends for Democrats if they, or let's say they impeach Trump, right? And the Senate acquits him. There's a reasonable argument that Democrats could use that as a tactic for 2020, saying, okay, the Republicans let Trump up off the hook, so everybody's got to turn out and make sure that we hold him accountable in the only way that's available now, which is voting him out.
That's just so hard because of how the Senate is. The Senate's different than the House, like strategically, because like in the House, there are a lot of different ways you can win a lot of different elections, a lot of different districts. The Senate is not like that.
No, I mean the presidential election. So say the Senate.
Oh, you're saying to win the presidency. Oh, right. Okay. Well, yeah. So that's a possibility, but the problem is there are a lot of people who don't believe he should be impeached. So you have places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, where these people are kind of like indifferent about his impeachment. Not necessarily that they don't believe he should be impeached, but they're indifferent about it. But his base is not indifferent about it. That's the problem. There are a lot of Democrats who are indifferent about it. There are a lot of independents who are indifferent about it. But his base, they're not indifferent about it. And there are more independents who hate the Democrats right at this very moment than there are independents who are pro impeachment.
Yeah. So but here's the thing. Trump is a weak incumbent, historically speaking.
Yes.
If you look at polling data for Obama and George W. Bush, I forget what the exact figure is, but a substantially greater percentage of people say that they would definitely not vote for Trump at this point in the first term than did for Obama or Bush. So Trump has a lot more baked-in hostility.
So okay? I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. Yeah. The problem with that analysis is, despite that being true, which it's kind of hard to accept that as true because these are the same pollsters who said that he had a 99% chance of losing. So like now with that being said, 56% on the economy. It's a lie. We know it's a lie. But the economy has almost been the singular defining factor of whether or not somebody gets reelected. And he has one of the highest approval ratings in the economy in history. So like that's very problematic.
I don't know if that's true that he has the highest approval rating in history.
But one of the highest. I think Obama had a pretty high one, and he won overwhelmingly. Obviously,
I mean, I'd be curious to see what Reagan's approval was on the economy in like 1984. But anyway, okay, let's grant that that's true. We're due for a recession. There hasn't been a recession since 2008, so we're actually past due for one. If you look at the cyclical trends, Trump,
we might be in one, and we just kind of put the speech.
Trump blew up any possibility of getting a big infrastructure bill through, which actually would have generated additional economic stimulus, which would have benefited him. So that's not happening. And if you did initiate impeachment proceedings, his character flaws and liabilities would be front and center every single day, to the point that you could imagine some segment of, say, moderate Republicans, to the extent that they even exist anymore, could become fatigued with Trump and say, but you know what? Enough of this. I'll vote for like Howard Schultz or something, or I'll vote for, Bill Welds, who's like running as a quixotic Republican challenger. And you only need given his margin that he won by in 2016, you only need a tiny percentage to be siphoned off in order for him to lose.
You talking about with the popular vote or with because he obliterated with the you're talking about the Republican primary.
No, I'm talking about the popular vote margin that he won in the three crucial states. So
got you. Okay,
Wisconsin and Michigan.
Understood.
And he's not doing well in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. I mean, Wisconsin and Michigan in particular, it looks like he will not be able to win those again in 2020. So they actually put out a trial balloon story a week or two ago where they said that he's going to actually contest Nevada, Colorado, and New Mexico. And those are even less plausible states.
That's what he's going after now?
Well, they're going to like try to expand the map because he's got so much money now that he can afford to invest in states that are sort of long shots for him. But it just shows that I don't think he's in good position to win. So, I mean, Wisconsin now has a Democratic governor. So Walker being the governor at the time that he won in 2016 in Wisconsin helped Trump because of the institutional infrastructural advantages that just having an ally in the governorship affords you. Michigan now has a Democratic governor. They were both elected in 2018, so that similar situation there. And the trend lines in both states are away from Trump. I just think he's weaker than people expect. I've talked to people who are ostensible allies of him who are pretty notable, who I'm not going to say right now who they are, but you'd be surprised who thinks he's not going to win.
Oh no, I think a lot of people. Well, so the people I've talked to, for example, like Lee Camp, he's a.
I'm talking about Republicans and conservatives.
Yeah, I meant Lee Stranahan, not Lee Camp. That's my slip up. So Lee Stranahan was one of the biggest supporters of Trump back in the day, and he's like, Trump will lose, but the caveat is if it's not a populist candidate that's going against him, they can't beat him, and it's not because of how popular Trump is. There's always the factor that there are a lot of people in this country who do not like the Democrats, like or the people like the Kamalas of the world, or Elizabeth Warren might be the centrist best shot to beat him, if they want a centrist victory. But like, there are a lot of people who voted for Trump in protest, not necessarily because they like Trump.
Sure.
So, and also, I think it'll ultimately be. We'll know as how good of a shot he has when he starts holding rallies closer towards the general. That's when we'll know. And then when he gets onto that debate stage, because this man has a way to twist lies and make them sound like braggadocious truths. And so
Steve Bannon says, and I don't know this firsthand, this was reported in the new Michael Wolff book, and you got to take that book with a grain of salt, but I think this quote anyway is accurate. Steve Bannon says in this new book that he doesn't even think Trump is going to run in 2020. It's all just kind of a facade, and he'll make up some excuse to bow out at the last second. And I think that's plausible. I mean, I've always thought that's plausible, especially if we get a dip in the economy.
Yeah, he'll make some excuse like, "Oh, they kept demonizing me." Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I made America great again. You know, I beat the deep state, and I'm 74 years old, and therefore I'm going to go enjoy my retirement in Mar-a-Lago. I mean,
would not be surprised.
People would not begrudge him for that, I don't think.
That would be the biggest favorite to the Democrats he ever did, because I'm not sure if any other Republican can win right now.
Yeah,
unless he. Now there is a caveat. He could campaign for a Republican, and it could shift the balance a little bit, because I saw him do that out here with DeSantis. Now, granted, DeSantis didn't end up being a bad guy. He actually ended up being probably Florida's best governor in like 2 decades, weirdly enough. But if he campaigns for a Republican, I think it could shift the balance. But like, Pence can't win. I would like to see a actual good Republican come up. Like, I'm one of those people who I want somebody who, like, a legitimate person who really wants to work with both sides to get things done, right? That isn't just playing like Trump was playing partisan politics. He wasn't even all that partisan. Him and the Democrats agreed on things like Syria and things like that. But when it came to like DACA, he didn't get his way. The Democrats didn't really get their way either. When it came to the wall, he didn't get his way, and the Democrats capitulated for.
There's an alternate universe where Trump came into office and reverted to his like New York City deal maker style mode, where he's not partisan. He tries to get the infrastructure bill done first, rather than delegating his legislative agenda to Paul Ryan, which was a disaster for him, as evidenced by the 2018 midterm results. And there's no Russia issue. I mean, the Russia issue kind of poisoned the well, because it made Democrats seek impeachment before he ever assumed office, which obviously provoked Trump into a much more oppositional stance against them than he otherwise might have been inclined to do. Yeah. Remember, Trump was a Democrat until 2011. Yep. I mean, so he's not a principal conservative. It's just that he had to cater to the Republican Party coalition.
You know, he reminds me of, he actually, like a Crowder, for example, or Ben Shapiro, or even a Dave Rubin. Whoever pats him on the back the most, that's who he's going to cater to.
Yeah, and Tulsi in a way patted him on the back just by taking that meeting with him that she did after the election. And sure enough, what happened? I mean, she told him to stop to the CIA program in Syria, and he did it.
He did it, and then they were like, "You can never come back in this office again."
Right.
You're way too persuasive. You
actually, in the interview that I did with her yesterday, she was a little. Maybe she said this before, but it was the first time I've heard it where she was explicit about like, we need to defeat Trump. Like she usually doesn't invoke Trump that much, but she said we need to defeat Trump, but it's got to be through the electoral process. It can't be through impeachment.
Yeah, we've talked about quite a bit, and we're both in agreement there. And I did a video where I kind of went up against this pro-impeachment group. And I was really nice to him about it because I understand that everybody just is not, they kind of hitched their wagon onto something. And
what group was that?
Oh man, well, I wish I could. I'll send you the video. Okay. But it was like a hardcore pro-impeachment group.
I've been saying I want to do like a public debate with somebody who's like a recent, like, so not the Ben Shapiro or Stephen Crowder style debate. I want to debate somebody who's actually equipped to put forth their arguments in a coherent way, who says, yes, we must impeach Trump on the basis of Mueller or Russia. Because my position on that is just no. I think it's a total joke. So I would actually love to hash out that argument, in a public venue, but we'll see.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a good conversation. I did one with an Elizabeth Warren supporter too about her quote unquote plans and why are we just now hearing about these plans? She's been in the Senate for almost a decade. That's a different discussion. But basically, oh man, I almost forgot my point. Hold on. What were we just talking about?
You talked to the impeachment people.
Yeah. So we talked to the impeachment people, and they are even under the impression that somehow this would help them politically, but also it's about more than politics. I'm like, hold on. I said, but ultimately you're about beating Trump, right? They're like, yeah. I was like, oh, well, shouldn't we beat him? Why don't we just focus our energy and our resources and efforts to beating him in a voting booth? And then, of course, usually the argument is, oh, no. We have to make sure we hold people accountable. Literally, and for me personally, and nobody, and maybe you, because you've been entrenched in this for a while too, when I hear a Democrat scream for accountability, whenever we know for a fact Hillary was guilty, but the only reason she didn't get indicted was because she didn't mean to be guilty. It wasn't her intent to be guilty. I should almost shit my pants, bro. I lose it. Cause I'm like, okay, so what about Hillary? I didn't say that to him. I'm always thinking like, what about literally every lawyer in this country that might have had their case thrown out because apparently ignorance of the law, it does make it okay to break the law. That's what we're hearing now. But because they were telling us to move on from that, right? They were telling us to move on from the email scandal. And now we're like, listen, the Mueller report is clear. Andrew McCabe got fired by the FBI, not Trump. You want to claim obstruction of justice, but James Comey was rightfully fired. He should have been fired. You can hate Trump all you want to, but James Comey knew about these conflicts of interest, according to the OIG report, and he still put Andrew McCabe in charge, and it was clearly politically motivated. So, like, there was no obstruction. He did what he was supposed to do in that instance. And when you tell them it's time to move on, let's just worry about beating him and the Republicans that you fear so much, and they almost lose their shit. Like they're worried they can't beat him in a straight up election, which is weird to me.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I agree with Tulsi's position. But as a devil's advocate, one thing I put to her was, okay, so the people who are pro-impeachment say that even if you set aside the collusion issue, Trump should be impeached on obstruction offenses alone.
But he wasn't. He didn't.
But Tulsi's position is the whole, and this is what I've been saying in one way or another for forever, at least since the report came out. There would have been no obstruction issue but for the collusion investigation, which came up with a result that there was no collusion established.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore there was no underlying crime. Yeah, it's true that people can still obstruct justice without there being an underlying crime, but
the initiation
this investigation is unprecedented in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
Well, so therefore you have to make a judgment as to whether it would be justifiable to impeach somebody for quote obstructing an investigation that was predicated on a total fiction.
Exactly, and it was clearly prior to the investigation initiating, it was clearly politically motivated. So if a cop decides he wants to stop a guy on the street because he wants to fuck with him, and then another citizen comes in and stops that guy from being harassed by the police officer will likely try and get the other guy on obstruction. However, if it's taken to court and the guy gets a good enough lawyer, they're gonna be like, well, you shouldn't have been bothering the guy to begin with. If there was no need to initiate the encounter to begin with, then that person is going to get off of the obstruction charge.
And it's just like ordinary police work like that, I don't even think is anywhere near analogous to what went on with the special counsel investigation. It was really unprecedented in American history because it was precipitated by this extreme intervention in U.S. domestic politics by the intelligence agencies, CIA, FBI, NSA. And we've never seen that before. So you got to take that into consideration when assessing whether obstructing that investigation is grounds for impeachment. I just don't think it is at all. If anything, we should be worried about the nefarious behavior that went on that gave rise to the investigation to begin with, such as sending spies to entrap people, trying to catch people on these bogus technicalities, and
like all Manafort, the way they did, like Manafort. The thing was that all the crimes that Manafort committed, like Mueller was in charge of the FBI when he committed them and didn't do anything about it, knowing that because he was under investigation from Mueller. They said, you know what, whatever, he's good, and then later on, he tries to. That's basically what Mueller used, what he already knew about Manafort, to basically try to make him snitch on Trump, or not really lie, right? So he could save his own ass. He didn't do that, and I want.
And that's why he didn't know anything. I mean, there was nothing for him to snitch about. That's why. I mean, that's why it was so absurd that he was put in solitary confinement to exert pressure on him.
To make
as if he was going to come up with some kind of smoking gun revelation on Trump. There was no such revelation to be had. Don't you think it would have came out?
Right quick. So in the Black community, this is why we have a strict no snitching clause. Because when they say snitch, what they really mean is we're going to tell you what to say so we can get this particular person, and you're going to say it, regardless of whether or not it is true. And that's kind of how it works in the normal policing. And I also want to say that for the obstruction thing, it's weird to me that there's such an emphasis on the obstruction thing now because the collusion thing fell through, right? And so they got to move on to obstruction. And then when you ask them, well, what did Mueller say? Well, if I could say clearly that there was an obstruction, then I would say it. No. No. Hell no. When I read that show, I was like, no, that's not how this works. Was he obstructing justice or was he not? Because but on the other side of that coin, if you could say clearly that he was obstructing justice, then you would say it. But you didn't.
I asked Tulsi about that line, actually. Mueller's line was something to the effect of, if we could say that the president did not commit a crime, we would have stated such. And it's just like, no, that's not what a prosecutor does ever in the American criminal justice system. You're totally inverting the basic tenets of civil liberty by saying it's somehow your responsibility to establish the absence of a crime. Yeah. It reminds me of like Minority Report. Remember that movie? Or I don't even know what it reminds me of. Some kind of dystopian movie, sci-fi thing.
Double speak, bro. Double speak.
And Tulsi had the same, dismissive reaction as me. It's just like unbelievable that anybody could have like read that or heard that statement and not immediately concluded that it was utterly fallacious. So I mean, it's just another amazing thing is, first of all, they're not totally ignoring collusion anymore, because if you look at what the Democrats are actually saying, it's pretty clear to me that any forthcoming articles of impeachment are going to include some elements of the broader collusion narrative. Pelosi and Schumer put out a letter last month where they asserted that collusion was not a settled issue. And that's why the investigations had to continue. God. If you look at what Beto and Warren and others say about him, why Trump must be impeached, they incorporate elements of the collusion narrative into their rationale. So collusion is still part of all this. But it's amazing because for the people who do pivot exclusively to obstruction, they just ignore that the 2-year investigation that they said was going to come up with the Trump-Russia conspiracy obliterated that conspiracy, and they just move on to the next subject. It's just
and also they like the Warrens of the world. They say, well, the collusion, and then they say, and the Mueller report does say he obstructed justice. Hold up, but the Mueller report also says there was no collusion. So the same report that you're going to try to use to justify impeachment is the same report that completely obliterates your reason for impeachment.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's amazing. It's amazing. That's why I made the point about that. That's why. Sorry, I'm shouting over you because I'm getting excited. But But I mean, that's why I made the point earlier about how people just need to study elementary logic. I know that sounds obnoxious when I put it that way, but we'd be so much better off if people just, as part of their mental toolkit, had just a groundwork of logical reasoning skills, because then this entire Russian nonsense never would have came about, I think, because it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. But I think Tulsi, and I've told her this, I think she's actually gaining support by virtue of for having an idiosyncratic take on Russia, right? And specifically on Mueller, because there is a segment within the Democratic coalition, not a huge segment, but enough that she can actually draw support from it, that craves somebody with an alternate perspective on this type of thing, which is why she's ahead of, like, she's either tied or ahead with like Booker and Gillibrand and others in certain polls. I think
she's actually fifth, and that's why they've been ramping up the attacks on her and pushing Warren, so that she seems like she's the more viable fourth or fifth or even third candidate.
But Mueller actually, I mean, Warren actually sort of underscores part of what I said about the Democratic base and their attitudes towards impeachment. Warren actually made a strategically adroit decision where she was the first out the gate to demand impeachment. So she benefited from all
that Rashida and all of them were going to push
in terms of a presidential candidate. In terms of presidential candidate.
Yeah, no, she knew in advance that AOC and Rashida were going to push for it.
She knew it was a kind of a foregone conclusion. So she calculated, okay, let me be the first and loudest on this subject. And let me also use my skills as a law professor and a lawyer to even if you disagree with her, which I do on impeachment, she's at least competent to discuss the relevant issues at hand, whereas Bernie is not. I mean, so he kind of got coerced, dragging and screaming into eventually like begrudgingly initiating impeachment, but he's not getting any political advantage from that. That all went to Warren, which is why now she's tied with him in Iowa. She's literally, I mean, I think a political environment dominated by impeachment is really bad for Bernie. It's just not his wheelhouse. It's not his bailiwick. He's not equipped to engage.
Issues, man. People.
He's not equipped to engage on a minute level with all the considerations around obstruction of justice, aspects of the Mueller report. He didn't even read the Mueller report, frankly, whereas Warren read it right away.
Tulsi read it.
And sure. Well, but sure enough, if you look at the latest poll from the most reputable pollster in Iowa, Bernie and Warren are now tied in Iowa, and that's not good for Bernie. I mean, Bernie almost won Iowa in 2016, so if he's now at like 16% or something, and he's like fading into third place, it's just not good for Bernie.
Yeah, but once again, they didn't have Bernie and Hillary tied whenever they ended up going up against each other in Iowa either. So it's I'm very reluctant to take any pollster seriously. I look at the numbers, right? And so the donations are a big factor for me. Not necessarily the amount of donations, but like individually, when you have over 1 million donations individually, that's insane. In this first leg of the election, Warren isn't even close to this.
This is the most. I mean, I know a lot of people. Whenever I like dispute people who engage in, I think, unfounded skepticism of polling, I get accused of being like a shill for pollsters. I'm not. I think that you can raise legitimate criticisms of individual polls, but you also can't dismiss offhand or out of hand the entirety of polling, because there actually is a pretty well-established practice. Not that there aren't flaws in how it's portrayed or in how it's spun or various other aspects of it. But for example, this Des Moines Register poll is like the gold standard of polling for Iowa, and it was totally accurate in 2016 within the margin of error on both Republican and Democratic side. So you got to at least assume that it's a roughly accurate snapshot.
Warren is up there. I do think that she's recently like gotten up there, and it's going to be, in my opinion, polling, especially when it comes to the establishment, is very reflective of who's being pushed the hardest at the time by the establishment, right? Because it will make sense. Who you're seeing on TV, Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren now. So that's who. But at one point, it was Beto. They swore that Beto had jumped up to third or fourth place. And
Joe Biden's not even on TV. He's kind of like sleeping, or he's not even doing much. But he's still. That's just the after effects of the Obama legacy.
Yeah, he's going to fade He's going to fade. It's going to be. I said this from the beginning.
I think he
Warren, Bernie, Tulsi, and probably Kamala by the end of this thing. I don't know.
I'm not going to make any predictions because who knows? We still haven't had any debates. There's probably going to be a couple candidates who like rise and fall based on unforeseen events. That's what tends to happen, or at least that's what happened on the Republican side. I guess the Democratic side is a little different. But Biden's not doing a whole lot, and I think he's almost a lock, not a lock, but there's a decent chance that he could fade a lot, but still win South Carolina because his lead there is just almost insurmountable. Frankly, because a lot of black voters appreciate the fact that he was the trusted confidant for years of the first black president, which is like their prerogative. But that just is going to keep his numbers high, especially in these southern states where the Democratic electorate is dominated by black voters.
Obama told him not to run.
Yeah. In 2016.
At the end of 20. Well, no. Well, even after for like when he was considering for this, but I think you're right. He did tell him in 2016 too. Like, but that says something. Like, whenever the president tells you not to run, like, bro, I've done this twice.
Obama. Well, the story is Obama told him not to run because he was still grieving from the death of his son. So he didn't tell him not to run because, I mean, you gotta. Obama and Biden became actually really, really close over the course of their 8 years.
Yeah.
They're trusted confidants. Obama spoke at the son's funeral. They are interchangeable with one another in terms of their legacy in the Obama administration. I don't know why people discount that. It's so powerful. It's the most valuable electoral asset you could have as a Democrat in a Democratic primary, which hence why Biden is leading still. Yeah. Is he a shoo-in to win anything? No. But the fact that he was he benefits from the association with Obama can't be understated.
But I think that does come with a certain level of expectations that ultimately vice presidents fail to meet, which is why we've had such a rarity of vice presidents running their own separate campaign later on, whether it's after they assume office or like after they finish their term. And then most of the time, I think it's like only one or two in the last 100 years.
No,
vice presidents they don't win their own elections.
They win nominations fairly often.
They can win nominations. They can win nominations fairly often.
Al Gore ran in 2001, won the nomination. Let's talk about nominations because we're not talking about general election. Al Gore ran in 2000, basically was unchallenged and won. Biden probably would have won the nomination in 2016 had he run.
I think
but Hillary became a quasi incumbent and therefore was a different scenario. George H.W. Bush was Reagan's vice president, ran and got the nomination in 1988. Walter Mondale was Jimmy Carter's vice president, won and got the nomination in 1984.
He almost went unchallenged too, right?
No, he wasn't unchallenged in 1984. But he basically ran away with it. But there was some challenge, but he was always the leader.
Yeah.
And you can go back even further. I mean, like Richard Nixon was Dwight Eisenhower's vice president and won and got the nomination in 1960. So yeah, it's a different time, obviously, historically. But there's people discount the effect. If there's one office you can hold that could be your best springboard to obtaining your party's nomination, it is the vice presidency. Doesn't mean that Biden's a lock to win. It just means that is a huge advantage that a lot of people, I think, were a little bit oblivious to.
I don't think that people are oblivious to it. I think that we have to address it in the context of like 2019 or even 2016. The problem isn't that it isn't a huge springboard, but like I said, now being the vice president in 2019, you're going to come under more scrutiny. He's coming under more scrutiny now than he ever would have come under if he would have ran like 2012, right? People would have assumed he was the heir apparent to Obama. Hillary even tried to leverage her association with Obama for quite some time during 2016. And then people were like, hold up, didn't you run a racist ass campaign against Obama? And then you
but that's the difference. That's an important difference though, because Obama and Hillary ran against each other and those wounds never quite healed. Whereas Obama and Biden were never at each other's throats. And Obama and Biden were elected twice on the same ticket together, whereas Hillary was never elected with Obama. So it's just different, which is to say that Biden benefits from the association with Obama more than Hillary ever did. I actually wrote a long piece on this like a month or so ago, laying out that argument. Not that I'm supporting Biden, obviously. I just think he has political advantages that people tend to overlook because they conflate him wrongly with Hillary.
Got you. Well, I'm gonna cut it off right there, man. Thank you so much for coming.
I can keep going. I could keep going all day, but yeah, let's leave it there.
We got a lot of elections, so we're gonna have a lot of stuff to talk about in the coming months for sure. Thanks for coming on and clarifying your positions and being willing to engage with people on what you said and standing by it and offering some clarification, man.
Yeah, for sure. Enjoyed it.
And definitely go. What's your YouTube channel called?
It's just called M Tracey.
M Tracey. Pretty simple.
Yeah. M.Tracey. Yeah. I mean, so you can find if you just type me in, you'll find it. I did an interview. I did a long form interview with Tulsi in March. So if you search that on Google, you could find it there and then just subscribe or whatever.
Make sure you follow Michael on Twitter as well for more of his hot takes.
Yeah. Hot takes served up daily.
There you go, man. And thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream interview of MCSC. And of course, as always, I'm your humble host, Niko House. Remember, more than anything else, people, find your balance. Peace.